Okay, I'm going to get started. And since we're recording, anyone who joins us late can always watch the recording to see what they missed. Welcome to Museum Studies' first webinar of 2023, Beyond Checking the EEO Box, Cultural Competency, the first step in DEAI, or DEIA. I am Brad Breehoff with Museum Study. Museum Study provides online professional development for people who work in or with cultural institutions. Today's presentation will be by one of our instructors, Helen Wong Smith, an archivist and librarian at the University of Hawaii, Manoa, and currently the president-elect of the Society of American Archivists. She provides cultural competency training for several organizations, including the Society of American Archivists, the Hawaii Museum Association, and the Council of State Archives, and leads our 4-week-long online course, Cultural Competency, which will run next month. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel. I will send a link to the recording to all who registered for today's webinar once it is available. Please mute yourself during the presentation. Feel free to use the chat window to ask questions, which Helen will answer during Q&A after her presentation. You can unmute yourself during Q&A to ask questions. And here comes some more people. So with that, Helen, I will turn it over to you.
Okay. Mahalo, Brad. I am going to open this and present and confirm with Brad that you don't see my notes. You just see my title.
I see your notes as well as the
Oh
title.
dear. So we have to change display settings. There we go.
There you go.
Okay. Well, I never learn. Okay. Okay. Aloha and welcome. To all of you, I'm so thrilled that there's interest internationally, but I have to give Brad credit for that because of his fantastic reach to all of you. When I greet you with aloha, it's not a gimmick that to distinguish myself as a native resident of these islands, but as a cultural identity with its own set of mores, responsibilities, and traditions. How can these opportunities, I want you to think about how can the opportunities to enrich the body of knowledge in your field, in your institution or repository, be achieved if you are unable to effectively work and communicate with a diversity of cultures. And when I say cultures, I'm not limiting that to ethnicity. And so those cultures that are around you and that you serve. So although this was written for library information sciences, I believe it's appropriate for all cultural heritage workers and institutions that often our professions are behind in its efforts to address the foundational issues of racism and disparities in our cultural heritage, both in the research and our collections and our services to multicultural communities. And so by incorporating the cultural competency standards, it's a framework is what I offer you. It's a way to improve your climate for diversity and address the lack of diversity that may be occurring in your collections and your workforce, your patrons, your visitors, your people that you collaborate with. And so it will improve all of these things for these to have more diverse outcomes. So let's go with the definition, like standards, there's quite a few as well for any term or any thing that we're trying to achieve. But this is the definition that I adhere to. It is a framework I offer to you as a framework toward DEIA, and it's the ability to function with awareness, knowledge, and interpersonal skill when engaging people of different backgrounds, assumptions, beliefs, values, and behaviors. And this is where it can create a culture, a community can be so much more, you know, different age groups, different educational backgrounds, all of these things, and somebody else's values and beliefs that are unlike your own, or unlike the predominant or dominant culture that runs your organization or makes decisions. These are the types of cultures I want you to consider. Okay, why is this not going forward? Where's my down key? Okay, here we go. Next. Okay, so why we do it? Because it should combine cultural mindedness with culturally centered communication skills for effective relationships with people. So I have been criticized for adhering to cultural competency instead of cultural humility. And what I offer to you is that, yes, cultural humility is a facet of cultural competency. One can say, well, I don't know anything about your culture, and leave it at that. That's humility. Okay, I admit I know nothing about your culture, but what are they going to do to take it a step further, take it 2 steps further, 3 steps further, so that they can actually learn about the culture that they're dealing with, cultures that they're dealing with, and then learning how to effectively communicate and have a relationship, an effective relationship with the other communities and cultures. So it is something, the reason I had brought this to the Society of American Archivists over a decade ago, is that they kept talking about the mega issue. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what mega issue you're talking about. I missed that memo. Well, they were talking about DEIA. And I said, well, you know, it's such a large issue and it's such a large intent that maybe if we just took a little tiny bite out of it and apply cultural competency, it can facilitate all your DEI efforts. So this is the reason they said, okay, that sounds great. What is it? How do you do it? And then I started training them about it. So this is what I consider very important. And as you can see, the Association of Science and Technology Center, their organization adhere to it too. So this is something that it's not foreign to the museum sector. So this is how we're going to define culture. It's the shared actions of groups of people expressed daily that are results of historically or socially transmitted customs or traditions. So you notice it had nothing to do with your race, has nothing to do with your ethnicity, has nothing to do with your age. However, there could be those are defining facets of your culture. Okay, so as you all know, we all have multiple cultures, right? The way I may belong to the culture of archivists, I may belong to the culture of historical heritage professionals. I could be culturally part of the Asian community. I could be part of the culture of growing up in Hawaii. You know, these are all different types of things. So the cultural iceberg, some of you may have seen this before, is that the obvious things are above the center. But what often stymies us is the facets or the beliefs, the values that are below the surface. And this is where we often get in trouble, especially in the professional workplace, that we take offense at somebody's value system or their body language or how they deal with conflict. And so these are all these, or their attitudes, you know, if you have people coming in that are unlike your normal patrons or your normal visitors or your normal workforce, and they're just enough that they're treated differently. So these are the types of things that I offer you to consider. So this is going to be available to all of you anyway, so don't worry about it. So it's a difference in human experience and then the social groups, the social cultural groups that are created. So the experience, like your living conditions, in Hawaii, we have a high rate of homelessness because it's so darn expensive to live here. I was just looking at some affordable housing, and despite being in my career for 35 years, I still am within that gap where I can't afford market-based housing. So I qualify for this affordable housing. So, you know, these, your living conditions, you can have many people who are homeless and are fully employed here. Your, you know, trauma. So I was discussing with a Filipina who was saying, and we were sharing that many Filipinas and Filipinos don't trust Japanese because of how the Japanese treated them during the war. And so my father had shared that, you know, they would rather work with him, a Chinese insurance agent, than the Japanese colleagues that he had. So those things can be generational as well. And then your social cultural groups as well. So somebody had given me an example of, oh yeah, because I'm so overweight, you know, I'm not treated the same way when I enter a store, a clothing store, or, you know, those types of things. I was just thinking of the scene in Pretty Woman where because Julia Roberts went into a high-end store, you know, they refused to serve her. And then the next day when she came in, gussied up, it was like, okay, we're happy to take your money. So, you know, these are the kind of things that are just, they happen in a nanosecond, right? We see somebody come in, we make assumptions, or that may be for your visitors or your patrons, but even when it's somebody that we work with and they respond to a situation differently than what has always been done. So those are the types of things that I offer to you to consider. This is one of my favorite cartoons. You know, they learned how to say gracias and we're supposed to be thankful. And that is something that I am so sensitive to, especially in Hawaii. We have so many people come here and learn to say aloha, and they think that they're culturally competent, or they learn to say, you know, 2 words and the worst was my son when he was in graduate school. He was talking to a professor and he says, well, you know, from the Hawaiian culture, this is, he goes, oh no, I know all about your culture. Don't tell me, don't have to explain it to me. It's like, this is a professor, this is his first year working on this campus. And that is just so dangerous. That is a dangerous thing to do. Just because you may have artifacts, maybe you have collections about a particular culture, does not mean you are the total expert on that. Okay, you may have a lot of knowledge, but please do not go to a particular culture and say, well, let me tell you about your culture. Look at all these things that we have here. You know, I'm not even talk about how you might have gotten them in the first place. But so the example that I use Brad as a poster child, the most culturally competent that I ever have heard someone do, is when he went to ATOM. And he was, Brad, who was it that gave you that advice to just listen? Do you recall?
It was probably both Saul Sapochi Drake and Sarah Sutton.
Okay, so they're not from the ATOM community, right?
No.
There you go. So we have 3 people who are culturally competent in that sense. So he went to ATOM, and the advice they gave him was just listen. Now, when you consider somebody with Brad's level of knowledge and expertise, I'm sure that he wanted to go and say, oh, I can help you with this. I can help you with that. You know, oh, you need this? Oh, here, let me help you. He just listened. So that is so rare. So this is something else that I want you to be cognizant of. So on the continuum, you have actual cultural destructiveness, and that could include taking items from other cultures into your repositories, and that somebody might be asking for back through NIGPRA and saying, nope, nope, it's ours, possession is 9/10 of the law, or whatever argument you may come up with. I've dealt with so many arguments. And so that's cultural destructiveness, all the way through to proficiency. Now, just with proficiency doesn't mean that you are the be all and end all of that particular culture. It means that you can interact with them with proficiency. It doesn't make you the expert. It doesn't make you now the cultural guru, but it does give you a level of proficiency. So it's a formative assessment, which is ongoing and will often place you in an uncomfortable position. That's the other thing. This is unfortunately not like learning a programming language. It's very personal. It forces us to stop and check ourselves when we have an automatic response to something. And so it doesn't mean that because you're culturally competent in one profession or one cultural group that you know it all about the others. That's been proven time and time again with Native American collections, indigenous collections. Somebody had said to me, oh, well, we know all about Asians. We have a large Vietnamese population. I almost I had to bite my tongue, because no, just because you have a Vietnamese population that you serve doesn't mean that you know all about all Asians. So these are the types of things that I encourage you to think about. So the facets of cultural competency are threefold. It's the cognitive and the affective and then the behavioral. So a friend of mine, indigenous professor here, he summed it up to know, value, do. And I love that. I mean, if I ever had tattoos, maybe I'd do that. Know, value, do. But it's like so many of us have the intellectual awareness. We have the knowledge base, okay? And that's just fine. You got to start somewhere. But it's your emotional awareness and your responses to the other cultures that is often missing. And that's the next step. And then how you actually behave and how you change your policies and procedures for your organization. Those are the types of things. So to develop any type of cross-cultural competency, it's necessary for individuals to experience change at all three levels. You can't just have the awareness level. So culturally competent professionals deliberately seek out various worldviews, which can help promote understanding between cultures. I recently sent out a survey, well, not recently, last year, I sent out a survey to the COSA members. And I was asking them questions like, how often do you go to culturally, cultures that are unlike your own, activities or restaurants, or what's the culture of your dentist, your doctor, and so on. And people were saying, why are you asking me these personal questions? We're talking about, in my archives, in my profession, why are you asking me, because it's your exposure. So professionals need to seek knowledge about other cultures and then use that knowledge to inform their skills and practice. So cultural empathy is a multidimensional learned attribute requiring perspective taking, cultural self, and differentiation, and it conveys understanding to others. So with the attitude part, positive attitudes are needed towards your own culture. That's the thing. You can't be hating on your own culture, as well as the cultural heritage of your colleagues and your patrons. So this begins by able to appreciate, value, and respect differences between your own heritage and that of your broader communities in areas such as, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, religion, sexual orientation, and cultural beliefs. When I was giving this course to another group, somebody says, well, I don't understand, we're all Americans. And I was like, okay, that's spoken like somebody who being American has worked for her, you know, because she's not even aware of the differences that exist within this particular country in itself. So that was a scary comment on her part. So how can these facets be integrated into your cross-cultural interactions? So what do you think is missing? You know, one of these three: outreach to a culture, telling them about the significance of your holdings to their culture. Okay, so possibly your behavior is definitely needs to be checked. And you can change that by saying, this is what we understand. However, this is your culture. Please tell us if we're mistaken, or what more can you add to that? Working with one culture and assuming you know all about that. I mentioned that earlier. Giving the same presentation to all cultures. Oh my gosh, if I could stop that from happening, people giving the rote presentation to whoever comes through the door. Take the time to learn about your audience. And then something as simple as deducting points from a candidate for not making eye contact when you're interviewing them. You know, different cultures, that's a sign of respect. They don't make eye contact. They're more demure, or and they'll defer to you in different physical ways. So, you know, these are the things. So that would require knowledge, and then how you react to that. What's your belief about that? So these are the types of things that that come into play in every aspect of our lives. So a great example is what the Arab American National Museum did post 9/11. So they recognized that the museum visitor experience is crucial to the cultural competency workshops, and that visitors tour the museum as they learn. So they had different with their learn their personal stories contained within the walls. Okay, so when you consider what they had to face post 9/11, and so they tailored their presentations, their programming to different groups. So now think about what a citizen might be different than business executives. Okay, so business executives, they're thinking more about how is their bottom line going to be affected? How is their workforce going to be affected? Teachers, they're dealing with children who are possibly facing bullying. You know, how are the teachers treating their Arab American students themselves? Seniors might have some archaic views or knowledge, what they think is knowledge about Arab Americans. So these are the types of things that this is how this museum changed their procedures. So it is an active process. And it includes sometimes messy elements in exploring. So what I always encourage people to do is to have EMAC contextualization and comparison, obtaining information directly from people of that culture. Don't read. I mean, you can start with reading about a culture. That's totally fine. It's very scary. I've seen this too often, that people will spend one semester or 1 or 2 years in a culture and then come back and go, hey, I'm the expert about this culture. So some of the old style anthropologists are a little concerning. You may have their records in your repository and their opinions of how they viewed these different cultures that are not necessarily well informed. Realize that. And so it's always better to have someone from that particular culture. Now, in order to get the trust and respect for that person from that particular culture to work with you is a whole nother story. And we would talk about that in the course. Because oftentimes disenfranchised or marginalized communities and cultures have had it. They don't want to talk. They say, this happens locally where they say, you come in, you got your grant, you come in and do your research, and then we never see you again. How does it benefit them? You have to always think about community-based research. Always think, how is this going to benefit them? Not just what knowledge or expertise you can extract to do your job well, but how is it going to benefit that particular culture? So this is something that takes a lot of time, a lot more effort, okay? But in the long run, it's going to be so much impact on your organization. So it's multi-level. So at the micro level, of course, you value diversity, and you recognize and you value, there's your cognitive and affective right there. And then your behavior, how you interact. And then this growth of respect between individuals expands with their community to communicate effectively with others. So that would be your collaborators, you're in society, you're even working with a very different type of organization. We all benefit from going beyond our own professional sector. You never know nowadays, you never know where support is going to come from, which is why when the FBI asked me to talk to them yesterday, I drove out there and I gave them a presentation, because I don't know, sometime in the future, or even if it doesn't, just for them to be aware of my organization, my repository, the efforts that we're trying to do will benefit in some way, both of us in the future. And then at the macro level, your whole organization becomes culturally competent. And this may impact policies and procedures, things like, who do you advertise positions to? What kind of requirements do you require of somebody? Do you have alternatives or substitutions, so that if somebody has a knowledge or expertise and in a particular culture that would be valuable, you can teach them the technical stuff later, you can teach them, but too often we make these barriers to even having cultures work with us or work for us or collaborate with us. And oh, well, they don't have a PhD, oh, they don't have a master's in whatever. Those are the kinds of things that we can look at. How adaptive are we to people's needs? Do you have somebody of a specific religion who needs a space to pray 5 times a day? Do you have a place for, I do a lot of traveling. And so I thought it was really interesting when I saw in the airport a service animal rest spot in the airport, so that the person didn't have to go outside of the airport and look for a piece of grass or ground somewhere. So you're attentive to people with disabilities who may need service animals. So these are the types of things that I like to think that all institutions will change their policies, have caregivers, I mean, too often we lose people because we're not flexible enough and in our demands of employment. And so these are the types of things that I encourage you. How we rate them when we're doing interview rubrics, all these types of things can be changed at the macro level. So I talked about respecting your own cultures yourself before, and I offer this as a exercise that we can do after this when we're discussing things. But I want you to think about, how does each identifier impact my worldview? Okay, you got to stop and think about, what's your worldview? Your worldview is not everybody's worldview. It might be misleading. Okay, so because I'm a woman of color, even where I grew up and reside, it's still viewed as I must be less intelligent. I must be less worldly. And then when you consider, well, yes, I'm a 63-year-old PhD student, and it's been 3 decades since I got my master's. But think about how I view myself when I'm with all these younger students, okay? So I may not speak up as well. I may not articulate myself to the professor or to the others when I'm trying to get my point of view across. And so this is the type of self-identity that I have. But if I'm working with somebody who's culturally competent, they may see that hesitancy in me and draw it out and say, well, what do you think? And I've worked with leaders who say, well, I'd like to hear your point of view. And too often we make the assumption that, well, they didn't say anything. They had the opportunity to say something. They didn't say anything, so they must be fine with it. But consider the different cultures that we're dealing with, that they may need not only to be drawn out, but they may not want to be drawn out and speak up in that particular setting. Maybe they are very uncomfortable with articulating their opinions in the setting that you're in right then and there. And you can give them another setting, having your door open, or having say that you're welcome to emails or something like that, having alternative methods of communication. Some people are very much more comfortable in different settings based on their cultures. So basically, when I teach cultural competency, it's the 4 skills. The understand the culture as multi-level and multi-dimensional. Think about the barriers to effective relationships. So culture at a personal level, one's personal identity, as I shared with you, is formed through interacting within one social group, for example, within your own family or your neighborhood or your workplace, and that your personal identity changes during one's lifetime. So ethnicity is just one influence on a personal identity. My children have their League of Nations. And so it's so funny because it's very, several decades ago, it was, you didn't admit at being Hawaiian. Now they're very proud for because of the Renaissance during the 1970s and all the acknowledgement of the indigenous culture. My children are very proud of being Hawaiian. And they never talk about their Chinese ancestry from me. But during the, was it 2008 Olympics, they're like, oh, I'm Chinese. So I'm like, okay, fine. So that changes. Other influences on your personal identity will be your age, your ableness, your religion, your sexual orientation, your socioeconomic position. All of these things play into your self-identity. And so with cultural mindedness, you have an inquiring way of thinking and you have keen interpretive skills. So you'll recognize different ways of thinking and communicating. So like I said, well, they didn't speak up. This was something to do with someone getting tenure, I believe it was. And they said, well, we weren't in favor of that person. And she goes, well, you had an opportunity. They had one opportunity, one method of voicing their opinions, and it was written. And some people don't want anything to be written. They wanted to do it verbally. So, those are the types of things that I encourage you to think about. So you recognize culture as multi-level and multi-dimensional, and then recognize the barriers. So interacting with one's group, I had mentioned that. I think that many of us will recognize that we behave or interact differently when we're dealing with our family than how we're dealing with colleagues at work. You may be more deferential to your elders, and somebody at work, you may say, oh, well, they should retire already. You don't value the age experience in that person. So be aware of those types of things. And then to the aspects of culture, these are things that that all play into observation and understanding. So somebody had shared with me that when her parents were faculty at Harvard, you know, they were very uncomfortable because if you didn't have a weekend at the house on the Cape, you know, you weren't in our same type of socioeconomic and you didn't belong with us. Or consider, you know, invitation to work or discuss work outside at a bar. Somebody might be a recovering alcoholic or something like that. Somebody's value with family versus professional life. And that's a very sad thing that we have to make that dichotomy. But I had a student who's pure Hawaiian. There's a handful of them left. She was from an island that you have to be pure Hawaiian to live there. And she was on this island of Kauai to go to school, as many of them do. And she didn't have a cell phone, took the bus to the historical society that I was running, and she just didn't show up for work one day. And I knew she didn't have a computer at home. And so I was concerned. And then when she did come back to work, the next time she was scheduled, I said, "Are you okay? You know, what happened?" She goes, "Oh, my auntie wanted me to help her." So I'm not going to come down on her and say, "Hey, listen here, in the real world or in the professional world, you have to tell me that." I understand that in her culture, family is paramount. If your auntie wants you to help you, you are no questions asked. You just stay home and you help her. So there's ways of me communicating. I don't make judgments against her. I don't put points down for her performance. I have to understand that is her culture. And there's ways that I can communicate to her that that's totally fine. I understand. But next time, you know, at least give me a call from home when you get home and on your landline, you know, let me know you're okay, because I was concerned for your well-being. So, you know, things like when I was with the Park Service, I remember one of the workers was eating a Filipino dish, and her white supervisor said, "What is that?" And she told her the name. She goes, "Well, I think it looks like dog barf." So, I mean, fortunately, they were close enough that she took it in the vein it was delivered, but often it can be misinterpreted, not as a joke. So these are the types of things. Think about the 6 barriers of, excuse me, personal, interpersonal communication, language, the nonverbal behavior, stereotypes that you may have grown up with or heard of by others. I can think of so many examples growing up here. Even things like your stress, that your discomfort when you're in culturally diverse situations. Some examples would be in an area where I live, near where I live, there's a lot of people who have, they're too young to be hippies. I don't know what you would call them, but they've chosen a certain lifestyle. And so if they come into town and they just smell a patchouli, or they have dreadlocks, you know, many of the workers or store owners will just not even wait on them, or they'll tell them to leave. I've seen institutions that don't allow homeless people to come and use their bathrooms, things like that. What I always think about is that consider people's culture in the workplace, because they may not be comfortable. Too often in our professions, like, how many national presentations did you give? Okay, how many times were you selected as the keynote speaker? You know, and some people, they're very uncomfortable making these presentations to large groups, but they are fabulous with small group orientations and workshops and so on. And that person who makes these national speeches is valued more when it's time for evaluation or promotion or something like that. Consider that some people are very effective in these non-traditional ways, what we would consider non-traditional ways. And so those are the types of, how well are they able to build relationships with your communities and their allegiance to the collective goals. You know, because this is an international crowd, you may not buy into the American way of the individualistic rights and so on, and be more collective, I would hope. But it's very Western, I think, to do things that promote yourself rather than promote the group. And this has been shown quite often with academic literature. You know, they'll go to a community or a culture, gather all their information, and then they come back and they publish, and it's only their name. They may say thank you to the community, but really it should have been a collaborative and group recognition. So these are the types of things that I offer to you. To practice culturally centered communication, the dialogue, one of the hardest things, conflict recovery. How are you going to go about solving a problem? And then how to design and implement organization-wide cultural competence. And this is what the things I referred to earlier, like your scoring rubric when you're interviewing people. You know, how much do you value that this person maybe didn't publish so many papers, but they worked with these different communities and gained the trust, and it was a long-term relationship with this community, and this is how they contributed to that particular community. So some of the culturally centered communication skills are listed here. And so what are your outcomes? Your outcomes, if you practice this, is that you'll have more effective communication and problem solving. You'll have through dialogue and negotiation and conflict recovery. You can have coaching, mentoring, teamwork. I've been the victim of several EEO violations for being a woman and then a woman of color. And my response in my cultures, it's not to file an EEO grievance, although I've been asked to and encouraged to, but that's just not I'm comfortable with that. So my response has been to make as many opportunities for people who may have the same characteristics that I have. So I go out of my way to make sure that people have scholarships, internships, are given first right of refusal for a position when they don't have your traditional trajectory or skill set or education. And so that's been my response to that. And then think about both the internal and the external strategies that you can use to promote cultural competency. So, you know, something like celebrating ethnic holidays is so basic, but you'd be amazed at how many people don't acknowledge it. And then self-help groups or networking among employees. I was very saddened to learn that one of the first repositories that I worked in, the paraprofessionals and the professionals didn't even eat lunch together. You know, everybody was separated. They didn't have an executive lunchroom or anything like that. But, you know, that's the kind of stuff that occurs so often. And I've actually seen professionals come into the lunch area, and the paraprofessionals are working here or are having lunch and socializing, and that person will not come and join them. They'll make it a point to sit on their side. It's sort of like, well, I can't even communicate with I can't relate at all to what you guys are talking about. So that's, you know, be aware of these types of things. And so and then when you strive for satisfaction, your view of what would satisfy you may not be satisfying to the persons or the cultures that you're dealing with. I took a group of Hawaiian practitioners to our state archives, and the state archivist was saying, "Oh, I look at this letter from Abraham Lincoln we have, you know, here in our collection." And after the tour, one of the cultural specialists looked at me and she goes, Why do I care? That's not what I care about. Why do you go out of his way to show us that? Because that's not my interest. So, these are the types of things that I encourage you to think about. You have the benefits of artifacts. Artifacts are one of the most effective way of sharing, of teaching cultural competency. Museums celebrate the diversity of cultures. They may provide an interpretation of artifacts in the cultural context, but too often, they stop. They interpret something and then they end it right there. And Brad had participated in a series of workshops that we did here in the islands, and is anthropologist from Fiji. When she was working in Australia, the Australian Museum had a fabulous Fijian collection, but the descriptions were so basic and sometimes incorrect. And so she had invited people of her culture to come in and help identify it. And then they had a huge festival where they invited all of the Fijians that lived in this area of Australia to come and experience, see the collections and have dancing and music and so on. So it broke down barriers, because otherwise these Fijian expatriates had never even been to the museum. The museum had things inadequately described, or and then there's just such a rich melding of knowledge sharing, because you open it up to the culture itself. So these are the types of things that I encourage you to think about. So it all starts with listening. So we should not come to a community with a predetermined agenda. Too often, this is what happens, you'll think of something and you get a grant for it, and then you come to the community, oh, we're going to help you with this. Did you even ask the community if that's what they wanted? Maybe they want to, or you come, oh, come and help us, tell us about this stuff. Well, what are you giving to them? How about giving to them how to care for the artifacts that they may not want to give to you? Maybe they don't want to give you these records. They want to keep them within their community. You can provide them with your expertise. The preservation librarian here had said to me, how do we handle it? We've been trained in preservation methods that it has to be in this humidity, this, temperature. This is the environment. This is the standards. And these communities want me to take that out and show it to them, these artifacts to them. I said, it was theirs in the first place. So, yes, we have this learning, we can offer them, but we don't negate what expertise they have just because they don't have our level of learning. So these are the types of things that it's listening first. And to recognize the community as experts and as an asset in regard to your work. This is something that I think has been underappreciated, that the community are assets, and they have their expertise in this. We just have a different type of expertise. So I leave you with this quote. And then I have a couple of prompts. I don't know if we have questions we can answer first in the
we don't have any questions in the chat, but okay. If anyone would like to ask a question, they can unmute themselves and do so.
Okay.
Do you want to unshare your screen?
Yes, I will. And then if nobody has any questions, then I will open up to a couple of prompts that I have for discussion. Ready and waiting.
I want to thank you all for joining us today. If you're interested in learning more about cultural competency, Helen will be teaching a course on it next month. where she will go into learning the skills to employ cultural competencies and the stages individuals and organizations can implement to improve relations with internal and external communities. The course is, like most of our courses, a 4-week-long online course. Last time Helen taught the course, we had people from, I think, 4 countries and 2 or 3 continents. So, Anne, did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm kind of fussy about getting things correct in writing in terms of typos and grammar and all that stuff. And how do I, correct people's stuff in a culturally competent way?
I'm sure you saw some typos in mine because I saw a couple of typos in my presentation. It's your attitude. It's your attitude. Instead of coming to them with kind of like I'm not saying that you would do this, but it's like, you got this wrong. You spelled this wrong. You're going that and say, I noticed a couple of things that you may have overlooked. Okay. And if it's okay with you, I'm going to correct them, or I'm going to put the correct spelling in brackets for you to see. Okay. There's really, my mother is a former English teacher, and she would send back my children's letters to her with a red ink, So I know, and it's with the best intentions, I mean, yes, but it sure is the communication part. It's the way you present it to them and say, and how you say, just to let you know, before this goes out to the public or for your information, here's some things. I would ask them, I found some typos. Would you be open to me to show you the correct spelling or the correct grammar? They use the semicolon incorrectly or something like that. They may say, oh, no, I'll fix it. Give them that opportunity. Give them that opportunity first before you jump down and say, look what you got wrong. And then if they say, okay, I fixed it, do you think that, say, oh, great, do you mind if I look at it again? Or would you be open to, ask rather than tell.
Okay, thank you.
That's a good question. I have frequently asked Helen questions about things that I was doing, like when I communicated with my instructors and I included a Hawaiian proverb. I want to check with Helen, is it okay that I do that?
And I said yes, because he gave it credit. He gave the proper credit. Okay, I'm gonna, in our few minutes left, I'm going to share the screen again, just because I want you, this is sort of what brings it home for a lot of people, in the sense that, have you been the recipient of cultural stereotyping? I heard a variety of stereotyping that people have been subject to. So while, like I mentioned earlier, I've been the victim of EEO violations for my gender and my ethnicity, I've recently been lumped with older archivists who don't have the challenge. They say, oh, well, you don't have the challenges in millennials. We have student loans and we have this. And this is despite my earning significantly less than them, because they came in with this skill set of negotiation that I never possessed. Or they came into the field with 2 masters, which I lack. And so I just thought that was so funny, because I was being stereotyped that I don't have money issues. So these are the types of things that I want you to think about yourself, how you responded to stereotyping. And then how has your cultural identity changed over the years? And do you expect it to change in the coming years? And if so, what might advance these changes or instigate these changes? And then how does your cultural identity impact your cultural competency? When I do this workshop, this course in person, I have a bag of, I have different color beads, and then I ask a series of questions and people put in a different color bead to show the different ethnicities in response to my questions. And people have said, wow, I didn't realize how white I am, or wow, I didn't realize that. One woman says, can I keep this? A Black woman, she goes, it just shows that, I'm so siloed. And so that really surprised me, that she recognized herself because she lived in an urban center, and she felt that, oh yeah, I'm culturally diverse, I can handle, oh hey, I'm a Black woman, of course I'm culturally diverse. So that was something that was very telling. So it's, you may move to a place that is less culturally diverse, and you just, these types of things, or you may not, or have somebody in the family marry somebody who's culturally different, and then you're starting to be exposed in different ways. So these are the types of things that I encourage you. It's very personal. It's, these are the types of things that we don't normally think about, but it all contributes to becoming culturally competent. And with that, I will shut my mouth and ask for any last minute questions. Or comments. I'll take comments.
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you for such a wonderful presentation, and that it mirrors, I've had the lovely opportunity to work with some First Nations communities in Vancouver and BC, and they mirror the same messages that you're sending. So thank you so much for offering this out to the wider community. It's great to see. We all have work to do. We can do it every day in all aspects of our lives.
Ain't that the truth? Thank you so much, Emma. And thank you to Brad for asking me to teach this course.
Yes, some of the topics in this course and in Helen's presentation today relate to some of the same things that we talk about in our decolonizing course. In particular, one that resonated with me on one of the slides was what does the community that we're researching get out of that research? They should get something out of that research, or not just the researchers or the people that we're presenting it to. The community itself should get something out of that research as well. And historically, Western researchers have not been very good at that. And so that's something that we talk about and read about in our decolonizing course. And then Helen likes to talk about this as being a cultural competency as being the first step in DEIA. We're hoping to add courses that go into following steps on DEIA. And in fact, we'll have someone who is interested in teaching on those topics sitting in on Helen's course next month.
Okay.
Thanks a lot, Helen, for the workshop here. I think we all have a lot to learn, not just the culture. I think the whole entire cultural industry, but the world in general, in terms of understanding each other and showing empathy. There's a lot of, I find there's a lot of compete and interest amongst various marginalized groups for recognition for their contributions made to lots of communities on the socioeconomic end, the historical end, the cultural end, and especially here in Canada as well too. We have much to do in terms of reconciliation and with our First Nations, Indigenous peoples. And I think COVID also highlighted a number of other marginalized groups that were left behind. And it's a struggle, I find, because it seems to be like lots of voices competing for attention, competing for an address of sorts. And I personally find that there is a bit of a blindness from all the groups to some degree. They're lacking a bit of, I think the key component, I think, is the empathy portion, to say that your cause does matter as well too. It doesn't trump my cause, or doesn't trump another group's cause or anything like that. But it'd be great for others to be able to empathize that we're all kind of struggling, no matter what groups we're in, to some degree, we're all struggling. And if we can somewhat listen in a non-judgmental way, understand where we're coming from, understand a lot of the cultural sort of, I can't remember what you had, the cognitive and the awareness of what's going on with each other. Maybe we could, find a little bit more of a harmonious way to bring each other's issues to the fore and address them. But I find right now it's a challenge, as there is a competitiveness of sorts, everyone trying to get their to push not necessarily their agenda forward before another group. Yeah. So thank you very much. I hope a lot more of these types of sessions happen, especially in the cultural industry, but I think also just in any industry and culturally as well too.
Very nice. Linda, did you have a question?
I do. If there's time for a quick question, just an observation from what I've been listening to during your discussion. I've been working in the museum field since the 1990s, and a large part of our research has involving Indigenous people in our exhibits. Might be an entire First Nations wing or an exhibit or display. And in my experience, I've made some wonderful connections with Indigenous people, and they've been extremely helpful in our research and contributed a great deal. They're very happy to have conversations and talk to us, but they've never yet sort of come to visit the museum or come to the openings or anything. So I'm how do we get to that next level of involvement where you're saying, how can we benefit them and how can we get to that next step?
Linda, I want to answer your question but it's multi-pronged and I have a television crew waiting for me downstairs. But what I would do is I'm going to send a link to Brad that he can send to you. Okay. Yeah. Because I was in the Archives Leadership Institute as an advisor, and this is exactly the scenario that we talked about, is that they don't come to the exhibit, they don't come. It's a little, it's dramatic. I mean, it's extreme, but I would say that they may, but are they going to be celebrated? It's just one thing to just invite them, but to say we are going to be making a point of celebrating what your contributions have been. And there are many different ways, in your press releases, how are they referred to? How are they credited? There's a number of ways that you can make sure that they are recognized for their contributions and celebrated. And I'm not even to the point where you give them a stipend. I don't care, but there's more ways than just that, because it's that recognition, it's that acknowledgement that they feel that they may not be getting.
Okay, good point. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, I will send that link from Helen to everyone who signed up for the course. And then also related to your question, Linda, we have a new course in April specifically on this topic, Foundations for Community Engagement, which will be taught by Shannon Palmer from Australia. And the course is specifically designed to address that topic.
Okay. I'm sorry to leave you so soon. Hui ho, aloha.
If anyone has any other questions about museum study or any of our other courses, feel free to ask them. Otherwise, thank you all for coming. I'm glad that you were able to join us today. We will be doing other webinars in the future. Right now, they're mostly going to be related to topics in courses that we teach. But in the future, that might expand as well. So thank you all.
Thank you.
I'm without audio. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh my God, that's good. Thank you.
How are you, Sandra? It's been a little
I
while.
thought that I was without audio. I'm just want to say thank you. I'm sorry lost the opportunity to talk with her, but I think that I will be in her course with you next month. So
Wonderful.
glad to see you. Bye-bye.
Take care.